And I'm going to ask Jimmy, will you say the prayer? Sure will. You like surprises? Say the prayer.
Thank you, sir. Will you pray with me, please? Dear Lord, we love you very much. We are thankful that you are God and you are good. We're thankful for your love for us, and we thank you for the gathering of us together tonight. I want to pray for all of us who are here, that we represent you and that we follow you with our lives. And I'm very thankful for all of these people who are sure to represent you in areas of legislation and government as well. I pray for your protection over those leaders, your wisdom for them, and that you would be honored in who we are and in what we do. So we love you. Thank you again so much for bringing us together tonight, that you would be lifted up and glorified tonight as well. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thanks. Okay, I want to recognize our elected leaders, and I know that David Bullard is in here. There's one of them. Senator David Bullard, J. Perry, Commissioner J. Perry. I'd usually just call him Ron, but it's Commissioner Ron Bullard. Who did I miss? Nobody. Okay, tonight we have a special guest. Probably the nicest person you'll ever meet, or real close. And Cindy, we are very glad you came down here, and I'm going to let Pastor Ledbetter take it from here.
Thank you, brother. Good evening, everybody. My name's Bill Ledbetter. We're live streaming tonight, just so that you know that. And I pastor Fairview Baptist Church, and Lighthouse America is hosting this event tonight with Cindy Byrd. And I want to begin tonight sharing a few thoughts with you as we prepare to bring Cindy here. We live in a great, great country. America is a gift from God. We are so blessed. It is Jesus who told us to build our house on a rock, so that when the winds and the floods and the storms come, the house would stand. And then he warned us not to build our house upon the shifting sand, so that if the winds and the storms and the floods came, the house would not stand, because it's built on shifting sand. The framers of this great nation built this house called America on the solid rock of God's Word. This is a constitutional republic. America is a constitutional republic, and it must stay so. Where did those Republican principles come from? Well, here's one example. Noah Webster said this about the Constitution, and it's one of my favorite quotes because it so clearly teaches all the principles right up front. But he said, "A brief exposition of the Constitution of the United States will unfold to young persons the source of Republican principles." He wasn't talking about the Republican Party. He was talking about the principles upon which a Republican government is formed. And then he said, "It is this writer's sincere desire that our citizens early understand that the correct source of Republican principles is the Bible, particularly the New Testament or the Christian religion." That's in a book called The History of the United States, 1832. It's in the preface on page 1. Most people in our country don't understand the principles of our nation at all, and they especially do not understand that this country is built upon God's Word, the rock of God's Word, because we were never taught that in our schools and in our upbringing. But it is true, and as a result, we live in the greatest nation in the history of man. If you just go back to 2020, the gross domestic product of this nation was $21 trillion with only 333 million people, as compared to the same year to China with 1.4 billion people and a gross domestic product of only $14 trillion. We have the greatest economic juggernaut in the history of mankind because this country is built upon the principles. We have the liberty to pursue our personal vision, yours and mine. Many, many years ago, too many to count, my wife and I saw a movie called Top Gun. And part 2 is coming out just now. I mean, he's wiser than I am, I'm telling you. But I was tickled to learn just today that over the Memorial Day weekend, that movie grossed $160 million just in the United States alone. Millennials are flocking to the movie, which shocks me because this thing is 30-something, 35 years old, the theme. But that's because we have the opportunity and the liberty to pursue our own personal vision. Isn't that wonderful? We can do what God's calling us to do. The old Democratic Party in our nation has been hijacked. I don't know if you know that, but it's been hijacked. And it's led by those who are boldly out of the closet that they want to fundamentally change the country, which means they want to move it from the rock foundation of God's Word and a constitutional republic to the shifting sand of socialism. Socialism fails every time. You know how to spot a socialist candidate running for office? Elect me, he or she says, and I will fundamentally change the country. They mean it. And we must stand today. We're in a battle to preserve the foundations of this beautiful land. The battle is raging and it's critical. We're at a critical point. The time has come for everyday, hardworking Americans to show up. People who understand the core principles on which America is built to stand up and speak up. The country is run by those who show up. And look around you tonight. I wonder what it would take to get a whole bunch of people here. And so we need to learn to stand up, show up, and speak up. Usually I get an amen right there. I got an email from David Barton. It was a group email just over the weekend. He was talking about Memorial Day and expounding on that a bit and the history of it. And he said the outcome of this political war that we're in right now will ultimately determine whether or not America, the greatest nation on earth, will remain. Now, I've never heard him say that in 35 years. He knows what's happening, and he's warning us we better pay attention because we're in trouble in this country. Each ensuing election in this country becomes more and more critical, and we must elect candidates, beloved, who know, understand, and will preserve the founding principles that form America's foundations. If you look at all the candidates across the state running for office, only a small handful of them know where America came from. Most of the rest of them do not. It is our job to see that that changes, yours and mine. It's time for us to choose who will represent us in our government going forward, and we are to be stewards of this beautiful land. We must know the principles. We must know the principles. James Madison said, only a well-instructed people may be permanently a free people. And that is our problem today. We are not well instructed in the principles of civil government, the way the founders took them from the Bible and gave them to us and built this country. I was reading a USA Today survey some time ago that said that only 1 in 1,000 Americans can name the 5 protections of the First Amendment from memory. Might be a good test for us tonight. Often it is for me. But we ought to at least know that. Amen. The 5 protections. Anybody know what they are? Religion's one of them. Speech, press, the right to peaceably assemble, and then to petition the government, right? We need to know those. So then, I'm going to get to the point here in just a second. If you elect someone that closes the Keystone Pipeline, if you elect someone that limits oil production, places nefarious fees on oil companies, do you know that oil companies, can I get on my soapbox for just 30 seconds? Oil companies buy more houses, more land, more cars, more trucks, more airplanes, more pipe, more fence, more valves, more airplanes, fly more airplanes. They do more good than any other single industry and group of companies and anybody else in the country. They spend money. They just do. That's not my personal opinion. They do. Well, you can't shut them down and then want to buy oil from foreign suppliers instead of our people. And you can't release 1 million barrels of oil a day from our reserves to drive the price of gas down. It won't happen. Policy changes the price at the pump. When we started this business, it was $1.68 or whatever it was, and we're headed for $5 a gallon. That's because of policy. You cannot have a politician release 1 million barrels a day for 6 months of our private reserves intended only for emergencies in case of war or something like that. That's 180 million of 600 million barrels of oil that we have in our stash. 30%, believing it'll drive the price down, and the price is going up all the time. You see, elections really count. We got to know who the people are. Matthias Burnett, ironically a pastor, preaching an election sermon from the pulpit, said, "Consider well the important trust which God has put into your hands. To God and posterity you are accountable for your rights and your rulers. Let not your children have reason to curse you for giving up those rights and prostrating those institutions which your fathers delivered to you. Look well to the characters and qualifications of those you elect and raise to office and places of trust. Think not that your interests will be safe in the hands of the weak and ignorant, or faithfully managed by the impious, the dissolute, and the immoral. Think not that men who acknowledge not the providence of God nor regard his laws will be uncorrupt in office, firm in defense of the righteous against the oppressors, or resolutely oppose the torrent of iniquity. Watch over your liberties and privileges, civil and religious, with a careful eye." Good advice. In an election sermon he preached at Norwalk, Connecticut. This is in 1803, May the 12th, 1803. He was from Norwalk. He actually preached it in Hartford. So we have to elect people who know the principles upon which this nation is built. People who are passionate to preserve the foundations, not change them. People who care about America. And that brings me tonight to our guest speaker, Cindy Byrd. CPA she's Oklahoma's 13th state auditor and inspector. The first woman elected to serve as the taxpayer's watchdog. She watches over our money, yours and mine. She's a CPA with almost 25 years of government auditing experience. She began her journey as an auditor in 1997. Throughout her tenure, Cindy has moved through the ranks and conducted every type of government audit possible across Oklahoma. Her audits have identified millions of dollars in misappropriated tax dollars, and waste of public funds at every level of government. That's what she's supposed to do. Identify where we are misusing the people's money. Do you know when someone identifies where people are misusing the people's money, there will be a great reaction? You know that, don't you? I heard somewhere, I forget where I heard it, but the guilty dog barks first. Did you hear that? It's something to think about. Cindy took on the role of County Auditor Division Director in 2011, and through her leadership, the division eliminated a 5-year backlog of county audits. In 2013, Cindy was appointed Deputy State Auditor over local government services and served in that capacity until her election as State Auditor in 2018. By the end of her first term, Cindy will have published more than 1,400 audits, including some of those that have garnered statewide, legislative, and national attention. The Oklahoma Care Authority, Medicaid Eligibility Audit, the Epic Charter Schools Audit, received the 2022 Excellence and Accountability Award for Forensic Audit by the National State Auditors Association. Oklahoma State Department of Health, PPE expenditures, the OESC, fraudulent unemployment claims are part of those audits. She is passionate about responsible government and strongly advocates for transparency and accountability in the receipt and expenditure of public funds. After all, it's the people's money, and they deserve now to know how it's spent. She and her husband, Steve, the love of her life, live in Colgate, Oklahoma. That's located in Cole County, Oklahoma. Faithful members of the Nazarene Church there, love the Lord, and we're glad she's here tonight, and I'm glad that she is our state auditor. So a big round of applause for Cindy Byrd tonight as she comes.
Well, thank you, Pastor Ledbetter and the Bryan County GOP for letting me be with you this evening. If the last 2 years have taught us anything, it's that conservative values and our God-given rights are worth fighting for to preserve for future generations. I'm a rural girl. I always have been and I always will be. I'm a fifth-generation Oklahoman. I grew up in Colgate. It's a town of less than 2,000, just a little bit north of here. I still live there today with my husband and my entire family. We don't move around a lot. I'm only in Oklahoma City during the week, and I can tell you that I'm most happy when my vehicle is pointed southeast, headed back home. I care about Oklahoma's rural communities. My dad was a rancher. My mom was a teacher for 33 years. She retired about 12 years ago. We love this state, and we love this country. I believe in American exceptionalism. Our founding documents make America the greatest nation for all people. Limited government, low taxes, and the protection of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These ideals of freedom and self-governance have created an opportunity for all people to dream, create, and use their God-given skills to advance the quality of life for all. I worked nights at a Wrangler factory to put myself through college at East Central University, and I still don't have any fingerprints to show for it. But Wrangler was the heartbeat of our small town. At one time, it employed 330 people. And it's our manufacturing jobs that provides more jobs and higher earnings in rural communities than any other trade. When President Clinton signed the NAFTA trade deal, it sent manufacturing jobs out of the country, and it hurt my little small town. The Wrangler jeans plant was shut down, and those American jobs were sent to Mexico. Big government said that it would be impossible to terminate and replace NAFTA, but President Donald Trump did it, and he ended the NAFTA nightmare and brought so much hope and optimism of jobs returning to our communities. What President Trump did was stir within each of us the need to pick up the mantle of patriotism, and he gave us the confidence to fight against the liberal rhetoric seeking to destroy our way of life. Now, America's past is on trial, and the future of the country depends on what we do next. Our constitutional republic and our God-centered convictions are what we need to stand on in order to defeat a woke minority ripping at the fabric of America. The power belongs to the people. As Oklahomans, we do not come into agreement with this decline of America. That is not who we are. We, especially in rural Oklahoma, have been blessed with good old-fashioned common sense, and we will hold to the conviction that our state and nation has a special purpose in this world. We've not yet written the next chapter of the great American story. Now, I never dreamed that I would be Oklahoma's 13th state auditor and inspector and the first woman elected to this statewide office. I'm a licensed CPA, certified public accountant, and I thought I was going to be an attorney. But my grandmother could not stand the thought of that. And she knew me better than I knew myself and put me on the road to becoming an accountant. And I love numbers, so she was right. I've worked for the state auditor's office for 25 years this January. It was my first job out of college. My first assignment was to audit the county treasurer's office in Wilburton. And for 3 weeks, I literally watched government take money from its citizens. I had a front row seat to single moms, ranchers, and elderly watching them make their property tax payments. And I knew right then that whatever was collected from the citizens had to be kept to a minimum, and every dime had to be spent according to the law. And I became a very passionate auditor watching over every tax dollar that government spends. Now today I'm going to share about the Office of the State Auditor and Inspector. I'm going to talk about some audits and audit requests that have been in the news lately, and then I will spend a majority of the time taking a deep dive into the Investigative Audit of Epic Charter Schools. So please let me know if you can't see or the mic fails and you can't hear. So the State Auditor's Office was established by the Constitution in 1907. The people of Oklahoma elect the state auditor as their choice to audit government entities. The state auditor provides continuity from year to year in order to oversee the entire financial picture of the state. The state auditor's office is set up to remain independent, without bias, to protect the objective assessment of public funds. And let's just be real here. Nobody likes it when the auditor shows up. At times, it can be like the skunk showing up at the picnic. But on some days, it seems heroic, like on July 16th. 15 trash bags of shredded documents, bank records, and other financial information were found in a dumpster behind the Western Heights School District Administration Building in Oklahoma City. And that day, the Oklahoma State Board of Education took control of the district operations, and who did they call to sort out this mess? Your state auditor. The next day, we went out and we met with the staff and the interim superintendent to ensure that they would still receive a thorough and effective audit. But on most days, it looks like this. These are the divisions of the state auditor's office and the statutes that give us authority to conduct audits at the state and local level. Now, the state auditor's office conducts an average of 350 to 370 audits per year, and this work is done by these 5 divisions and approximately 100 auditors. Now, each of these divisions perform a different type of audit, and I finally figured out an illustration to describe the different types of government audits. So think about you and your bag at security at the airport. A financial statement audit, it's like the x-ray on the monitor. If something looks suspicious on the screen, it might stop, look a little bit longer, but it really is just a quick check. It's looking at the accuracy of the numbers on the financial statement. And this is the audit that most CPAs are familiar with, and it's the statutorily required audit for our municipalities and our school districts. Now, an investigative audit, also referred to as a forensic audit, that's when security has the authority to remove the bag from the belt, open it up, empty its contents, and look at it for everything and even test it for gunpowder residue. In other words, there's full freedom to audit and investigate with subpoena power to see if there are any potential abuses of funds. Now, an operational audit would be if security decided to check that your suitcase was packed in accordance with the law and regulations. And a performance audit would be if security provides you with recommendations on how to pack your belongings in a more efficient and effective manner. Now, an operational audit is a type of performance audit, but both audits are meant to help find ways to ensure government services are being delivered in the most effective and efficient manner possible and in compliance with the law. I do have to be formally requested to conduct investigative audits and performance audits. So this past week, the House of Representatives, led by Representative Jared Kendricks, overrode the governor's veto of House Bill 1090, a bill that would have allowed your state auditor's office to conduct performance-type audits without a request. The State House wants a stronger state auditor's office to stop the abuses of taxpayer money, especially what has been going on with Swadley's and other agencies. Now, the Senate refused to hear the veto override because they are in agreement with the governor that additional audit work could be an unnecessary cost and burden on state agencies. They don't think the auditor should have that much power. Now, citizens can request a special investigative audit through a citizen petition, and it requires valid signatures from 10% of the registered voters within each district, or within that district. Now, county audits are not restricted to the type of audit we perform, so we've designed many procedures to quickly identify any problems for the $5 billion in revenues that flow through all county government each year. The Oklahoma Constitution requires us to audit the 77 county treasurers, the 65 EMS districts, and by statute, the 27 district attorney audits. Now, our state division is required to conduct a financial audit over the entire financial report of the close to $30 billion of all state funds. And that includes $13.5 billion of federal dollars that run through all of the state agencies. And this is crucial to the financial picture of the state because it impacts our state's bond rating, and it also impacts the ability for Oklahoma to continue to receive federal funds. So this is the division that's auditing the COVID funds. Now, in Oklahoma, federal grants have grown from $7.2 billion in 2019 to now $13.5 billion, mainly because of COVID dollars. And federal COVID-19 relief dollars were sent to Oklahoma through the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, the Coronavirus Preparedness and Response Act, and the Consolidated Appropriations Act. And then from the two largest funding streams, the CARES Act in 2019, and in 2021 and 22, the ARPA funds. Now, for fiscal year 21, the state division audited roughly $4.2 billion in COVID expenditures, and these funds have been distributed to all levels of government and must be audited per the federal government. This year especially, the state auditor's office has spent many hours with counties to help answer questions concerning the allowed and unallowed use of the ARPA funds. During the height of the pandemic, the Oklahoma Employment Security Commission handled the massive influx of unemployment insurance claims. And last year, the Employment Commission paid out $2.3 billion in unemployment insurance claims. Our audit found an estimated $400 to $500 million were fraudulent claims. And this is not unique to Oklahoma. This is happening across the nation. For the fiscal year 21 single audit, the unemployment program has approximately $3.4 billion in expenditures. Now, concerning COVID, the state auditor's office was requested to audit how the health department was spending these funds. So maybe you heard on the news about the release of the health department audit. In April 2020, former Attorney General Mike Hunter requested the state auditor's office to conduct an investigative audit of the state health department. He had concerns with the way the health department was acquiring PPE. That was the personal protective equipment like the masks and the gloves and so forth. Now, the state auditor's office completed the audit and delivered the report to the Attorney General's office just days before AG Mike Hunter abruptly resigned in May of 21. And then I received an open records request for the audit by a reporter, which promoted the release of the audit. Now, as the head of the state agency, I am required to comply with the Open Records Act. And I believe that all public records should be open and easily accessible to the taxpayer. And all information used in that report was 100% public record and could have been requested by anyone who knew what to ask for. And as far as the findings, it was an unprecedented time in the midst of a pandemic trying to get necessary supplies. So we reported that $5.4 million was paid for PPE and the goods were never received. Now, there were some issues by the commissioner giving unauthorized purchasing authority, which may have contributed to this. We also found that there were several significant salaries increased. The commissioner's salary increased from $189,000 to over $335,000 in less than 6 months. Now let's talk about another audit request that has recently been all over the news. On March 7th, we released an operational audit on the Oklahoma Department of Tourism and found that there were not enough checks and balances in place to ensure that taxpayer money received at the state parks is being spent and deposited the way it should have been. Now, closely following the audit release, news reports began to break concerning the relationship between Swadley's Barbecue and the Oklahoma Department of Tourism and Recreation. Now, according to the news reports only, as an investment strategy in 2019 and 2020, tourism contracted with Swadley's and paid them over $13 million plus another $1.3 million in management fees to renovate and operate restaurants in Oklahoma's 6 state park lodges. Now, per the contract, renovations of restaurants were estimated at $2.2 million. Tourism reimbursed Swadley's around $11.9 million, which, if accurate, is more than 5 times greater than the estimate. Now, the contract included a clause to reimburse the company for up to $1 million a year for its financial losses to operate the restaurants. Tourism paid the company's $2.1 million operating losses for the 1 year. Knowing all of this, tourism still requested a $19.3 million budget increase for fiscal year 23 to the legislature. And on April 15th, the Oklahoman reported on a previously established relationship between Jerry Winchester, who was the executive director of the Department of Tourism, and Swadley, dating back to when Winchester was CEO of an energy company and Swadley's was doing the catering. Now, Oklahoma County DA Prater requested a criminal investigation into this matter by both the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation and the Oklahoma State Auditor's Office. And according to DA Prater's letter received in my office on April 14th, the alleged conduct has resulted in at least $4.5 million in excessive payments to Swadley's by the state of Oklahoma. At first, tourism announced that they would amend the contract with Swadley's. But then, on April 25th, Director Winchester hand-delivered a 4-page letter to Swadley's informing the company that tourism was canceling its concession agreement because of suspected fraudulent activity and questionable business practices. Now, Swadley's was given 2 days to fully shut down operations at the 6 state park locations. 4 days later, on April 29th, the state of Oklahoma filed a lawsuit against Swadley's, and Jerry Winchester, the executive director of tourism, resigned. Now, the OSBI, the state, and a House committee are all committed to investigate this. But despite the media coverage, SAI, my office, is absolutely approaching this investigation with independence and the thoroughness and expertise expected of this office. Now, I've looked at some of the Swadley's documentation, and it's very disturbing. Bids were reportedly sought by tourism from more than 24 vendors in January of 2020, and Swadley's wasn't even among those companies. Yet, in the end, Swadley's ended up being the only vendor to submit a bid to revamp and operate. Now, in Title 61 of state statutes is the Public Competitive Bidding Act. Title 61. No level of government is exempt from this. This statute details how to let bids and spend public funds. Now, this is not one business contracting with another business. This is government contracting with a vendor using the people's money. Now, government is not a private business, and I would like for you to think about this. Our state is not a company, and government is not a business. It is a stewardship of services. There's no such thing as government funded. It is all taxpayer funded, and it must be run in the most efficient an effective and honorable way possible. With government dollars, the taking and spending of money must be done according to statute, which specifically addresses the RFP process, that's the request for proposal and bidding procedures. With the handling of money, there must be a separation of duties and the expectation of documentation. Now, concerning tourism, in 2019, they restructured the agency. The board to oversee the agency turned into more of an advisory role, and their financial responsibilities were removed, putting power into the hands of one person who only answered to the governor. Now, I found in my 25 years of service that when the fragile structure of checks and balances is altered or off kilter, that's when problems appear. So let's look at some investigative audits at the local government level. Now, even though we publish 350 to 370 audits each year, it does not include schools. We do not conduct routine audits in cities and towns. If we audit a school or a city or town, it's because something appears to have gone wrong, and we've been requested by either the governor, district attorney, or the attorney general, even a citizen's petition, to come in and do a forensic audit. Now, this is a current list of cities and towns that are under investigation or pending an investigative audit. Our audits are finding anywhere from $4,000 to over $1 million of public funds have been misused or misappropriated. An investigative audit can cost a city or town anywhere from $30,000 to $90,000 per audit. And as you can see, the investigations are happening in our smaller cities and towns, mainly in our rural areas. And that investigative cost can really place a hardship on those citizens. Now, I'm going to talk about the town of Bennington and the town of Tryon as we go through this. So these are the top 10 reasons why a municipality is added to the investigative audit list. And unfortunately, none of these areas are being audited in our cities and towns until this session. House Bill 1058 was signed by the governor, which means that these areas, the basic review of credit card statements, payroll, and the handling of cash, will now be incorporated into these local government audits. See, the number one reason why municipalities undergo an investigative audit, violating the Open Meetings and Open Records Act. Now, even the perception that a city or town is hiding information from the citizenry can prompt an investigation. My office always emphasizes be an open book. Government employees are stewards of the government's checkbook, which means the people have the right to request and see what you're doing with their money. And as state auditor, it's my job, if it's under my jurisdiction, to ensure that those checkbooks are in order. Now, Bennington, of course, is located between Durant and Hugo, with a population just shy of 300 people. And the board did not comply with several aspects of the Open Meeting Act. At least 25 times the meeting minutes reflected the board improperly discussed and voted to take action on topics not listed on the agendas. And that prompted an investigation through a citizen's petition. The audit reported that more than 1/2 of the town's annual budget was misappropriated. The mayor signed blank purchase orders, so the clerk treasurer was easily able to issue extra checks outside the regular payroll period and without the board approval. So Bennington's clerk treasurer, police chief, and assistant police chief received over $15,000 in unauthorized and improper payroll payments. The town debit card was used to make $1,600 in unauthorized expenditures. Bennington also had $100,000 in unpaid payroll taxes. Now there's a tax liability of $100,000 owed in payroll taxes, which is about 50% of the town's annual budget. Because of this, it could take this town years to get back on sound financial footing. The police chief also sold one of Bennington's police vehicles without the city's approval and pocketed $1,000. He also received over $800 in free utility payments and was provided a home that he did not have to pay taxes on. Now, Tryon is a small town of around 700 people between Stillwater and Chandler. In May of 2019, the board members of Tryon became aware that the town's bank account was overdrawn by approximately $8,000, and they were also several months behind on paying their bills. The state auditor's office released an audit in February of this year with findings totaling $95,000 in misappropriated town funds, which is 13% of its annual budget. The person in charge of law enforcement seems to have been the one breaking the law. The former police chief appears to be responsible for over $86,000 of the total $95,000 misappropriated. He misappropriated close to $5,000 from the police bank account through cash and ATM withdrawals. 6 of the ATM withdrawals occurred in area casinos. He also overpaid his salary by $70,000. The chief's wife was the appointed town clerk treasurer, and she also overpaid her salary by $5,000. And joining the police chief and his wife in overpaying their salary was the utility clerk. Now, the 3 of them created a category called hazard pay for their timesheets, which means if they had to touch the sewer, either through billing, phone calls, payments, or actually going out to work on anything at any time, they gave themselves an additional 8 hours on their timesheet for that day. Why is this happening? Yes, the town of Tryon experienced major financial loss at the hands of the employees, but it was passive boards not actively monitoring the funds that allowed these people to take advantage of the taxpayer dollars. It's the board who ultimately bears the responsibility for the town's financial welfare. Whether it's a state agency, a school district, a city, or a town, I can point to board after board across the state who may have been subject matter experts, but they were not financially minded and they didn't take care of the money. We cannot successfully operate as a state without proper board oversight of our taxpayer funds. Now, throughout Oklahoma, ad valorem taxes, your property taxes, are being held in escrow. Now, $80 million of your property taxes are being held by county treasurers because oil and gas and mainly wind companies are protesting property valuations made by county assessors. It can take years to settle these tax protests by energy companies, but these dollars are desperately needed to meet budget demands today. And it's been the toughest on local school districts. So as state auditor, I've been brought to the table as the legislature is looking for solutions to this very complicated and contentious situation. And one way to speed up the protest process would be to have all necessary documents from all parties assessing the value to be released before anything is allowed to be protested in order to come to a resolution on the value. Here's a list of school investigative audits. Last month, we released the investigative audit concerning Stillwater Public Schools, about 3 weeks ago. For 7 years, the School Nutrition Services Administrative Assistant misappropriated more than $216,000 from the school due to a lack of segregation of duties. And then we're also currently working on the Western Heights School District in Oklahoma City concerning allegations of severe cronyism with board members and school officials possibly benefiting financially. But to date, the worst abuse of taxpayer funds in the history of the state is the investigative audit of Epic Charter Schools. I'm going to give you a condensed version of the Epic audit and then conclude. So the OSBI has investigated Epic for 6 years. And then in the summer of 2019, the OSBI issued 2 separate search warrants accusing the founders of the school of fraud, embezzlement, forgery, and racketeering. On October 1st of 2020, Part 1 of the investigative audit of Epic Charter Schools was released. Now, the audit was not about or against charter schools, virtual education, or choice options for family. The audit wasn't even really about the school. The audit needs to be renamed the investigative audit of an education management company that took over the school's checkbook. The investigation was about how Ben Harris and David Cheney created a complex scheme to siphon off millions of taxpayer dollars dedicated for student learning to become state-appropriated millionaires. Now, normally, if the state auditor notifies the public and the legislators that there's been abuse of millions of taxpayer dollars, there is immediate action. But after the release of the Epic audit on October 1st of 2020, no action was taken by lead decision makers, and another $80 million was given to the founders. In the early 2000s, Harris and Cheney, the founders of Epic Public Charter School, worked together at an education management company called Advanced Academics. Ben Harris helped establish charter schools, and find people to serve on the boards. And in return, the charter school hired advanced academics for a large percentage to help manage the school and to use their technology resources. Now, Harris has mentioned that it was from his charter school development around the country that he knew how to create EPIC. Now, just FYI, Ben Harris graduated from UCO with a degree in political science. So what is an education management company? Charter schools contract with education management companies for services to help them establish all the necessary financial, legal, IT, and even curriculum and program needs. There are two different types of charter schools. There's a sector of charter schools established by a grassroots movement. People within a community see a need, they come together to establish a charter school, and then the community establishes an independent governing school board composed of concerned citizens and parents. Now, that's very different from a sector of charter schools intentionally established so that education management companies make big profits from our public education dollars. For-profit charter management companies have become the Enron of public education, and that's what we're talking about here with Harris and Cheney. So here's the concept. In 2005, Harris and Cheney started Epic Youth Services, LLC, a private, for-profit education management company. So Harris and Cheney had built their company, now they needed a way to finance it. In 2011, Harris and Cheney founded Epic Public Charter Schools. Epic is a public school, just like your Durant Public School. Absolutely no part of this school is private, and Epic is 100% taxpayer funded. Now, even though Harris and Cheney started the school, they do not own Epic Charter Schools. Harris and Cheney own Epic Youth Services, LLC. It's a private education management company, which is separate from the school. But it's confusing on purpose to have both their company and the school named Epic. Harris and Cheney created a nonprofit 501c3 to govern the school and named it Community Strategies. Now, all charter schools are set up to have a nonprofit school board in order to receive state appropriations for the school. Charter school governing board members are not elected like traditional public schools. They are appointed. So Harris and Cheney filled the 5 seats on the governing school board with hand-picked, admitted longtime friends. Now, the friendship wasn't the problem. It was about choosing individuals who would not question their financial decision-making. The hand-picked governing school board is in gray because they only served as figureheads and they only met 4 times a year and voted on financial matters after they had already been made. It was Harris and Cheney as the private company who ran the school board meetings. Now, Harris and Cheney wrote an operating agreement, I'm going to call this the contract, for their friends on the school board to hire their company to manage the school. Harris and Cheney's private company was hired for 10% of all dollars, both state and federal, received by Epic Public Charter Schools. The problem is their contract did not specify exactly what goods and services Harris and Cheney's company was providing for the school for the 10% management fee. And there's more, and this is the most controversial part. Harris and Cheney also wrote into this contract that their company was to manage a student learning fund account. And Harris and Cheney set up the learning fund account to collect $1,000 per student per school year from the school's general fund and deposit those dollars into their private account. And then Harris and Cheney tasked themselves to manage each student's $1,000 on behalf of the school. Now, Harris and Cheney created a structure where their private company receives 30% of all the school's public dollars and complete control of the school. Behind the solid line, Harris and Cheney have 2 private accounts, one for their 10% management fee and the other for the student learning funds. Now, by terming these accounts as their private funds, it was locked down from any type of government oversight, and no one, including the state auditor, has ever been able to verify that the dollars placed into these accounts are being used for what they were intended for by law and by contract. When Harris and Cheney had their friends on the school board agree to the contract, it literally placed all educational and all financial decisions of the school into the hands of the 2 company owners. In order to keep everything behind the solid line hidden, Harris and Cheney did the following. So Harrison Cheney contracted with one CFO named Josh Brock, who answers to them as the founders of the school and answers to them as the owners of the company. Now, how can the CFO of the school also be the CFO of the company? On one hand, the CFO writes the check from the school funds, and then on the other hand, signs the back of the check as he deposits it on behalf of the private company. Now, a little side note, Josh Brock, the CFO, is from Cushing. And coincidentally, Epic's hired auditor, as well as their largest technology vendor contractor, were all from Cushing. And we found it ironic that the hired auditor's name was Mr. Crooks. Now, from 2011 to 2019, for 8 years, David Cheney, who was a 50% owner of the company, also served as superintendent of the school. And it makes you wonder, as superintendent, was Cheney looking out for the best interest of the school or the best interest of his company? And why would the school board's attorney, Bill Hickman, ever allow a contract like this to be signed? Isn't it the role of the school board's attorney to advise and protect the school? Well, let's just say he made a very generous salary, and it seemed as if the needs of the company came first. Epic's spokeswoman was Shelley Hickman, the school board's attorney's wife. After the audit was released, the company hired an internal auditor, and she was used by the company to present reports to the school board, assuring them that there was no malfeasance with their 10% management fee or the student learning fund. The internal auditor's reports were then used by Epic's PR and hired lobbyists to persuade decision makers that the state auditor's audit was flawed. We have since learned that Epic's internal auditor is a family member of Josh Brock, the CFO. Now, as you can see from the Harrison Cheney pictures, there is no distinction between Epic Public Schools, the governing school board, and the private management company. It's all Harrison Cheney. And it appears that Harris and Cheney and CFO Brock handled all the financial transactions and were probably the only three who really knew what was going on behind the scenes. Now, between 2015 and 2021, $68 million was paid to the company for the 10% fee, and an additional $145 million dedicated for student learning was transferred to the company's private account without any transparency or accountability. So who works for Harrison Cheney's company to take care of all the management and administration of the school, which at one time was the largest school district in the state? Well, we met with Ben Harris and we asked for his employee count, and he responded with, "What the legislature will do if we make our employee count public record, they will bludgeon us about our fees, and they will say it is too much money and I need a price decrease." Well, Harris never told us his employee count, but according to his reports filed with the Oklahoma Employment Security Commission, the company had 0 employees outside the 2 owners from 2010 to 2018. So who was doing the work of the company? Who was managing Epic One-on-One, the all-virtual school? Who was managing Epic's other entities? For example, who was managing Epic Blended, the brick-and-mortar locations, or Epic California, or Epic Panola? And most importantly, who was managing the Student Learning Fund, the $145 million they were going to manage on behalf of the students? The answer was the Epic school employees. The Epic school employees that were paid for with state tax dollars, working on state computers in state-funded buildings, utilizing state email addresses, did the work of the private company. Now, if a for-profit company is utilizing state-paid employees and state-paid resources to run and benefit their private business, this is considered embezzlement. From 2011 to 2019, Harrison Cheney never submitted a detailed invoice to the school board for payment for their $68 million. And that places the governing school board and the company in possible violation of IRS laws. Remember, it's a nonprofit. Now, Harrison Cheney's company are required to prove to the board what services and the cost of those services that they are providing the school for their 10% management fee, and the board is required to prove that they are not paying above fair market value for those services. Now, it wasn't until 2019 that the company was forced by law to provide a detailed invoice to support their 10% management fee to the State Department of Education and to the school board. It's also important to note that by law, the company's invoices for services must be actual income and expenditures, no estimates or prorated amounts. So let's take a look at the company's invoice. The company submitted these falsified invoices for payments. They created these 14 categories and submitted the same exact percentages every month for the entire year. Epic One-on-One, this is a purely online school. And Epic Blended, these are the brick and mortar locations where students can attend. See the food service management? How does a virtual-only school have $37,000 spent for students who require no child nutrition cost? And remember how I told you that the company had 0 employees until 2018 before they hired 3, two were lobbyists and 1 was a security detail? See the certified salaries and the non-certified salaries? How can the company claim certified salaries when they have no teachers working for them, and claim non-certified salaries when the company has no staff? We also have several questions why a purely online school needs to spend over $600,000 for land rental and construction services. As you can see, Harrison Chaney took a 10% cut of every school dollar based on false invoices. And remember, David Chaney was both superintendent and 50% owner of the company, so he signed off on both sides of all PO transactions and attested by signed affidavit that the falsified financial information submitted to the State Department of Education was accurate. Now, I reread the hired company's contract over 20 times, and I kept asking, exactly what services have we been paying this company for their 10% fee? And for asking these types of questions, I've been accused of being against free market enterprise, and I've been questioned numerous times in different ways if I am too concerned about a company's profit margin. So from 2015 to 2021, the company was paid $68 million for their 10% fee. We know they provided IT services. Well, Epic is currently, now that we have a new board, currently paying approximately $1.5 million per year for IT services. So let's use this number. $1.5 million per year over the time frame of the audit is $10.5 million. They also provided a superintendent. So the highest paid superintendent in Oklahoma makes close to $400,000. So $400,000 paid for superintendent services from 2015 to 2021 is $2.8 million. And finally, we know the company paid a CFO, or provided a CFO. So the highest paid school CFO in Oklahoma makes around $200,000. So $200,000 paid for CFO services is $1.4 million. So we can make an accounting for $14.7 million paid for services the company provided. And that's at fair market value. There is the $14.7 million compared to the $68 million means that there is $53.3 million unaccounted for. $53.3 million is a major reason why there has been little change and much strife and cover-up surrounding this investigation. For $68 million, this company has placed the school in both legal and financial trouble. They falsified the reports under affidavit and violated the school's charter on 13 counts. Now let's turn our attention to the Student Learning Fund. Now, I am unaware of any other state in this nation that would allow taxpayer dollars appropriated for student learning to be controlled by a private company in a private account with no transparency or accountability. Now, the State Auditor's Office and the Attorney General's Office believe that the Student Learning Fund is public money. On the private company's invoices to the school for how much to withdraw from the school's general fund and to place in the outside learning fund account, the student count was left blank. There's nothing to indicate how many students times 1,000 equals the dollar amount paid into the learning fund. According to the company's brief filed with court, they claim they used the State Department of Education's student count criteria. It's called the FQSR. Well, if this is the student count the company used, then that would mean that during the time frame of our audit, the company overpaid themselves $8.3 million. The CFO, on the other hand, claims that he used the day 45 enrollment count. Okay, well, this would mean that during the time frame of our audit, the company overpaid themselves $7.4 million. Then the company hired a forensic accountant with Grant Thornton. And based on his calculations of the student learning fund, he determined that the company, during the time frame of our audit, underpaid themselves by $1.6 million. Well, we couldn't understand how he came up with that number, so we asked for a phone meeting. And after further questioning, the auditor explained that he used every single student who enrolled prior to October to calculate the student count. We found that very interesting, and so we asked him, are you including students who may have enrolled in EPIC but never participated in a single day of instruction? And after a pause, he answered yes. Now, we received threats from EPIC's attorneys if we spoke out about the $8.3 million overpayments from the school into the Learning Fund. The school's attorney said, since the learning funds are private funds, the state auditor's conclusion of overpayments was speculative at best. But our overpayment findings were validated on June 24th of 2021. The State Virtual Charter School Board compliance auditor reported that the learning fund payments did not match the enrollment at EPIC One-on-One. The compliance auditor said that Harrison Cheney's company received at least $4 million in extra funds from the virtual-only school in just 1 year. Now let's take a look at another example of the company mishandling the learning fund dollars. So here's a question for you. If things like curriculum and technology are coming out of the school's general fund, and things like curriculum and technology are coming out of the learning funds, why are there separate accounts, one public and one private? Why is a private learning fund even necessary? Shouldn't all public school expenditures come from the school's general fund? Well, Harrison Cheney refused to prove how they spent the $1,000 per student per year because he says releasing that information publicly will compromise their entire business model. So instead, the company gave us these price ranges, not actual expenses. So what are the real costs? The company allegedly placed $1,000 into student accounts that was held by them. The money was never given directly to the parents or students. And then the company immediately skimmed off the top allocated fines and fees, like the $85 software and shipping fee. Now, $85, the fee taken off the top of each of the 60,000 EPIC students enrolled for the 2020 school year, that's nearly $5.2 million. So what was the $5 million used for? Nobody knows. We're also concerned that Harrison Cheney were personally profiting, along with friends and family, by being a vendor and or possibly marking up the cost of the items sold to the children. We do know that they used the Student Learning Fund as a line of credit to provide cash flow to their business, which is clearly seen by several million in transfers to their private bank account. Instead of using their 10% management fee to pay for their business expenses and expansion of their company, Harris, Cheney, and Brock used money from the student learning funds as their personal piggy bank. This appears to be why they deliberately overpaid the student learning fund over $14 million from 2015 to 2021. Now, we found thousands of dollars of Oklahoma Student Learning Fund designated for Oklahoma students was transferred to finance their EPIC California startup, as well as cover its payroll expenses. And finally, Brock and Cheney used their personal credit cards to make expenditures for the Student Learning Fund, as well as their personal spending. So thousands of your tax dollars have been paid for legal services to distinguish what credit card transactions were for the school and what transactions were for personal expenses. So now you can see why Harris and Cheney continue to claim that those are their private funds. Harris and Cheney set up a ring of legal counsel around their private accounts and the governing school board. Powerful law firms continue to stonewall us from obtaining basic public information. And unprecedented in the state auditor's office, we've never had an audit team met with such intimidation tactics. We were forced to use subpoenas, and over 50 subpoenas have been issued to date. Now, after the EPIC audit came out, the school board was replaced with all new members. and the newly elected board chair, Paul Campbell, clearly stated that Epic Charter Schools severed ties with Harrison Cheney's company and from the California school. Epic's new CFO informed the school's board that by no longer paying a management fee, the school will see a 13% increase in per-student funding. This new path resulted in Epic saving $30 million in 1 year to put back into the students and families. In 2021, the school was going to pay $30 million to Harrison Cheney for their 10% fee. Well, the school already had a superintendent. The $30 million was going to go to 2 people who were providing the school mediocre technology. In 2022, the school decided to keep $29 million for the students and apply just a little over $1 million for a technology upgrade. So Epic Charter Schools today is truly centered around developing students for their future. Epic's new school board are doing a tremendous job turning Epic around from all the company's malfeasance to create an environment of transparency and integrity. However, the company continues to be a problem for the school. Harrison Cheney filed a breach of contract suit in court for the school to pay them $6.8 million for transitional services and another $430,000 for providing personnel services. What was interesting is the CFO didn't know of a single thing this company had provided once they were fired. Now, Harrison Cheney have not turned over the Student Learning Fund records to the school either, claiming that they are still paying vendor invoices. However, Learning Fund vendors keep calling the school inquiring why they've not been paid, and this has placed another potential $10 million burden on the school. The State Auditor's Office earned a national award for our investigative audit of Epic Charter Schools. And I value this greatly because the work of this audit has made Epic a better school today. The audit is a success story of what can happen when a government entity receiving taxpayer funds gets back into compliance. Because of the audit, $20 million was returned to the state's treasury to be placed back into public education across the state. As well as what was mentioned earlier, Epic was able to keep $30 million more this year to be used for students and technology. So it's been 19 months since the release of the audit, and on February 1st, I was asked to give an Epic update to the House Education Committee. And I shared about how 2 business owners walked away with $68 million in taxpayer dollars as business income and an additional $145 million under the guise of student learning funds, and how Harrison Cheney's scheme had been protected because of large campaign contributions, millions spent on advertising, PR, and lobbying efforts, and philanthropic giving, all paid for with your tax dollars. And then 3 days later, on February 4th, the Epic case was turned over to Oklahoma County District Attorney David Prater. And several levels of law enforcement, including the IRS, are engaged in aggressively looking into this. And I know there will be charges because the criminality of this cannot be ignored. A special investigative audit of the State Department of Education is the most requested audit by the taxpayer, and one of this type has never been conducted in the history of Oklahoma and perhaps the nation because it has to be formally requested. And that finally happened on September 16th of 2021 because of the Epic audit. This is the fiscal year 21 state appropriated funds into our largest state agencies. And as you can see, education receives around 52% of the total state appropriated dollars, which includes higher education and career tech. Now, on the campaign trail in 2018, there was an outcry for an audit of the State Department of Education. Of course, I couldn't do that without a request. But to audit everything about an agency of that size would take years, be very costly, and would result in little change. So the question is, and I want you to consider this, what are the issues that an audit of the State Department of Education seeks to resolve? And this has been a difficult question for people to answer. We know education consumes a lot of taxpayer money, but how do you put that into an audit? Education is a giant, so we're going to uncover it one piece at a time. The audit will address 2 major questions that taxpayers have. How is my tax dollar, reaching the student in the classroom? And do schools spend too much money on administrative expense? The audit has 2 primary objectives. The first is to identify all revenue sources flowing into education. This is going to include all streams from the federal, state, and local level. And altogether for fiscal year 21, we're looking at $7.6 billion. And we're going to determine whether the revenues and expenditures were handled in accordance with the law. Now, we are not auditing how all of the 546 individual school districts are utilizing their allocated funds. That would take an individual audit request for each one of those districts. Now, the second objective is to determine if the State Department of Education and the local school districts are complying with all financial reporting requirements through the Oklahoma Cost Accounting System. With education, when you have something so big, it's good to start with understanding things at a basic level. And my hope is that whenever we start to roll out the different audit sections, first the revenues, then the expenditures, and then the OCAST reports, it will provide one piece at a time the areas that we need to start asking the tough questions. And then through this process, we can find ways to make positive changes for education. Now, to find the audit reports mentioned today, please go to my website at SAI, that stands for State Auditor and Inspector, sai.ok.gov. We're redesigning the agency website, and that should be live soon. There will be an interactive map to also help you find the audits in your legislative districts. You can also like our Facebook page. If you Google or search for Oklahoma State Auditor and Inspector Cindy Byrd, you can find firsthand information on our investigative audits as they're released. Now, when I took office, I believed everyone would want to know about the fraud, waste, and abuse and work together to get it fixed. But that's not always the case. It's not always easy to shine the light of transparency because things that were meant to stay in the shadows get exposed. But I will tell you this, liars figure, but figures never lie. And that's why I love being an auditor. There's no such thing as government funded, it's all taxpayer funded. I am a Christian conservative and I represent and advocate for the taxpayers of Oklahoma. And I want you to remember that this is the office that's looking over your tax dollars, and I report my findings directly to you, the taxpayer. I do want to say one more thing. Pastor Ledbetter kind of talked about this. Government is getting bigger every day on your dime. And you know, whenever it feels like government's so out of control, you don't think we'll ever get it reined back in, I firmly believe that the only way we will ever rein government in is to get a handle on where our money's going. You've got to know that. It's an honor to serve as your state auditor. You'll find no greater advocate for accountability and transparency than me and my team. Thank you. Our question.
You have plenty of customers, don't you?
Never lacking.
Keep them squirming. Does anybody have any questions? Donnie?
Looking from a military and law enforcement perspective in my past, okay? We've always had inspections, okay? If, say, an inspector general, an IG for a company comes in, there's a change of commanders and things. Everything is looked at. Books, any money is brought into the unit has to be accounted for. All equipment. If something's missing, somebody's got to pay for it. I've had to pay myself for equipment that I've lost in the field because it wasn't there on display for an inspection. Okay, so when you get a block on trying to inspect and do your job, because you're like the IG. Right. Okay. That disturbs me. Okay? So when you do an inspection, do you call in people from outside to come help, or is it all within your staff? Because you mentioned OSBI comes in, or in conjunction with you. Do you call in contractors to also help, or to do the auditing, inspecting?
Okay, so the answer to the question, are we talking specifically about the Epic audit too? We did not call in anybody to help us with this. We had the personnel available to conduct this audit. However, we were blocked from getting information. They did put up a lot of walls to keep us from getting down to the information. And I mentioned that we had to issue 50 subpoenas just to get basic financial information from the school. So it is very disturbing that we weren't able to go into a public school district. Now, guys, think about this. This would be like, not for a second that I think your superintendent would do this, but this would be like the Durant superintendent taking 10% of every dollar and putting it in an outside bank account and saying, folks, it's okay. I've got it covered. You don't need to see anything here. And then he also took $1,000 per student and put it out in an outside bank account and said, you don't need to see it. I'm going to spend it on the kids. We would never stand for that. Epic School is a public school just like Durant Public Schools. It was set up as a nonprofit because that's how charter schools have to be set up. So not only do they have the regular legal issues with that money being taken, but now they also have to account to the IRS. So we also went out, we had to call in the Attorney General's office, we had to work with OSBI, and we also had to, we've also worked with the IRS. So everybody's on deck for this audit.
Here's why I asked that was, okay, you mentioned more the cost for an audit. Okay, everybody that's doing the auditing is already on payroll.
Okay, no, that's not correct. Okay.
To go in and do an audit.
Okay, so here's how the auditor's office is structured in Oklahoma. We do not have appropriated positions. I have appropriations that cover a small part of payroll, and the legislature has set it up where we have to bill for our cost. So our costs are about 60% of what a public CPA firm is. So yeah, I can see your confusion there. We are not fully appropriated. We have to run the state auditor's office just like a CPA firm would, and we have to bill for every hour.
Okay, because you mentioned that there was a concern about the cost, and so they would try to back you up from doing your job. That's the way I was reading that.
Are you talking about the veto that happened? Yeah, you're actually right. They were concerned about the cost to the agencies. So because my office is not fully appropriated, if the legislature and the governor had passed that bill, then if we decided that we needed to go in and audit the State Department of Education, we would charge them by the hour. And they were worried that an agency might have to pay too much. Now, I think that that came into question last year with DHS, and I think that our audit cost was like 0.05% of the agency's total appropriations. We felt like that was a good investment for good government to let taxpayers know, but there are concerns that they feel like that maybe it's too hard on agencies. I do not. I believe every agency needs to be accountable. Did that answer everything?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I know, like, for county government and EMS agencies, we set aside, when we budget, a percentage of our millage. Like, how does a school, I mean, do they just actually pay for that out of, are they supposed to have money budgeted for an audit also, just in case it comes up?
Okay, so the point here was that county government and EMS districts have to budget 1/10 of $1 million and put it aside in an account, and they can't touch it. And that's supposed to be used for audit cost. School districts, I don't believe that that's mandatory, but they get their audits done by outside CPA firms. They get to choose who they want to audit them. But if we come in to do an investigative audit, they have to bill us, or we have to bill them for that hour for hour. Okay. Was there a question? Did you have a question about the?
Did the governor do what he was supposed to do in this situation? Didn't he have to sign off? Or
In which situation?
in the thing up there, I saw his signature.
The governor's, okay, so it's important to note that the governor is the one who requested me to audit Epic. Yes, that was a good thing, yes. This situation might never have come to light, or it would have been years down the road, but also there were several benefits from this audit that I'd just like to remind you that because of the EPIC audit and weaknesses that were discovered at the State Department of Education, we're now going to audit the State Department of Education, which is what a lot of taxpayers have asked for. And then, of course, we've seen the huge savings to the school because of the audit. So, yes. Okay, the question is, did the governor go along with the audit of Swadley's? I did not talk to the governor about that, about the initiation of Swadley's, because that was requested by Oklahoma County District Attorney David Prater. So somebody other than the governor requested that audit. But you'd have to ask the governor that question. Okay. As the auditor, I can tell you that a system of checks and balances are absolutely necessary. If you gave me a $100 bill and asked me to go to Walmart and purchase a 6-pack of soda for you, whenever I come back, you would want to see a receipt and you would want to see exactly where your change was. That's simple internal controls, and we have got to have that over all of these state agencies. Whenever the governor came in, laws were changed to give him sole authority over appointing people to head up those agencies, and the boards who might have looked at expenditures and approved them or denied them, that authority was removed, and now they're only there in an advisory role. So now we have one person taking care of everything without any oversight, and that never makes for a good outcome. So, Senator Bullard.
Yeah, would you comment on, I believe it was House Bill 1090, about if you had had the at-will privileges we were trying to give you, what could have and why it would have been prevented, for example, on Swadley's or some of these other things? Go in a little more detail about why that is.
Okay, a performance audit. That type of audit is where you find efficiencies in government. You have to, right now I have to be requested. And as I mentioned, House Bill 1090 was passed by the House to give me that authority. Now, this type of audit, let's just take the tourism department. If we were given the authority to audit, to conduct performance audits, we would have went into tourism, we would have analyzed their revenues and expenditures, any type of changes, drastic changes from one year to the next. We could have looked to have seen what the causes were, but we could have also looked at any large contracts to see if it was in the best interest of the state to even enter into those contracts. That's what a performance audit does. So it absolutely would have given us that authority to have conducted an audit to find efficiencies and to weed out anything that wasn't really of good benefit to the taxpayers. Did that answer that? Okay. The way they caught Swadley's, Loft, which is the Legislative Office of Fiscal Transparency, we were doing an audit and they were doing an audit. So before we planned ours, we looked on their work plan. They had made it public they were going to look at the budget and expenditures. So we looked at the revenues. And just to give you a glimpse into the other side of tourism, after my director started that audit, she came to me and said, Cindy, I think we have a situation like the health department for 2017. They're not balancing, they don't know how much money they have, the revenues are not being taken care of. And it wasn't long after that that Loft came to us to tell us what they had discovered. But ultimately it came from a whistleblower, is what Loft has reported. A whistleblower brought that to everyone's attention. So, Representative Humphreys, you had a question, I'm sorry.
And I want to preference this, that not everybody who takes a contribution knows everything, but have y'all looked into where all the contribution money that EPIC gives and where all that goes? Is that part of your audit, or is that out of your
Yes, we have looked at all of those contributions, especially after we released the audit and quickly started getting attacked for releasing it. It's not out of the purview. We always look at the influences over something, but I do want to emphasize what you just said. Just because some of these legislators took campaign donations doesn't mean they knew what was going on at EPIC. As I mentioned in my presentation, these three men, the two co-founders, the owners of the company, and then the CFO, They were the only ones who had their signatures all over the financial documents. I don't know that anyone else ever really looked into the finances to understand what it was. They were providing school choice. As conservatives, we want school choice. They sold their school as an alternative to public curriculum, and that was a lie. They were required by law to teach the same curriculum as Durant Public Schools. There was no difference there. It was a public school. So people really thought that this was a great thing, that we needed to expand it. And I get that. I believe in school choice. That wasn't the issue at all. But by promoting it as this great alternative and telling people what they could do, people failed to look at the finances, and no one really understood what was going on.
Do you know if all that money flowed through one consultant, or, and I walked in late, so I may be asking questions you already answered, but did that flow through one consultant or many? Do you know that?
You mean political consultants? That part of that investigation is still ongoing. Yes.
Is that right? I'll ask 2 questions.
Okay.
Try to keep them short. So for my first question, are there other charter schools in Oklahoma, and have we seen any issues with those?
There are other charter schools in Oklahoma. I think there are maybe getting close to 20 other charter schools, but keep in mind, the state auditor's office only gets called in when someone requests me to do the audit, so I can't speak to any of the other charter schools. I mean, I want to believe there's one out here that's doing a really great job. Epic, for everything that it was promoted as, was in the bottom third of outcomes of all public schools in the state. So, for whatever that's worth.
So I guess for my second question, what specific system or steps would you like to see in place to make sure this doesn't happen again or with another charter school?
Let me think about that. No, that's fine. I'll answer any question you have. I would say this, not just specific to charter schools, but to everybody receiving taxpayer dollars. How do you keep it in line? Oversight. Oversight. It's got to be there. People have to know where their money's going, and if you can ever hide any part of government, guess where you're going to find the malfeasance? So you've got to have accountability, and there were steps taken. A representative from Jinx, Sheila Dills, she proposed many changes that would have closed some of these loopholes and provided greater accountability and transparency. And I think the House passed some of them, but the Senate did not. Nothing against you, Senator Bullard. Senator Bullard has been great for accountability and transparency, but one member can only do so much.
I'm sorry, that just raised actually another question for me, because I do know that Epic spends a lot of money on electioneering, and I'm not saying that there was a quid pro quo, but how is a company which is receiving tax funds then able to spend its money influencing the people who appropriate tax funds? Because I would understand that it's illegal for a tax-funded corporation or nonprofit to engage in electioneering. Is that not right?
Well, you're on the right track there. So remember when I kept hinting about nonprofits? Why do you think the IRS has such strict control over nonprofits? So that they don't become a money laundering machine. So you've got to make sure you're following the laws. You've got to make sure a nonprofit board can be held personally, financially accountable for any misspending. So all these structures are set up in place, but because these two founders set up the school where they had total control of it, nobody knew. But you're absolutely right. There is no universe where they should be able to take your tax dollar, siphon it off into a company and say, oh, don't worry about it, I'll spend it the right way, and then use that to influence legislators. And it wasn't just legislators who got contributions. There were some very established conservative groups in Oklahoma that took money from them that they were able to influence, and then of course they tried to make sure no laws were passed to change the status quo. I think I'm not sure I really answered that exactly the way you wanted to, but long story short, it was wrong. Are there any other questions? Yes.
Thank you for assisting local government to do it right. For the last 25 years, you've been teaching us to do it right, not coming after us, and I thank you for taking that work ethic up towards the state level.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you all very much.
I appreciate what you do, and I know they do. At least I think they do. Don't we? Thank you for coming down here, Cindy. We have some of her campaign signs and some brochures and stuff like that over there. Yes. Were you motioning me to shut up and sit down? Okay.
I need to make a distinction here tonight. Stand right here. Stand right here, brother. This is your fault. Stand right up here with me. I just need to make a distinction tonight. This meeting is hosted by Lighthouse America. This, in our mind, is not a campaign stop. We hosted this so that we could hear from our state auditor the facts of what's been happening in our state. Amen. And so this brother, though, is with the GOP, and he's emceeing for us tonight by request. Everybody have that tonight? And so I just want to make that clear tonight.
So I didn't win anything then.
Trust me, I just don't want to lose anything. So now it's back to you, buddy.
That was good. Okay. Elected officials, do you guys want to say anything? David, do you have anything to say? We're almost done. We have nice, comfortable benches here.
I'm a teacher and a politician. Never asked that question. No, here's what I want to say. It's rare in history to find people who are legitimate to their word. As I've gotten into politics, I have found this out so have you. So when we find someone who is willing to go in, who is willing to stand up and do what she is told to do without question, even though she knows the consequences before she stands up to do it, I would say publicly I endorse Cindy Byrd for state auditor for the next 4 years. And I do so for this reason, because Cindy has done exactly what Cindy has said she would do. Cindy has been exactly who she has said that she would be in office, and we need 4 more years of her in office. So I'm very proud of you, proud to endorse you, sis.
Come on down.
I just want to say real quick, I was in a meeting. It's called Rural Caucus, so it's where Democrats, Republicans get together. We had our state superintendent, who I like to call Joy Hofschister, or Joyless, because she robbed the joy from the children. Anyways, she came in, and I asked her a question. And it was, if you have a school that has 75% of your student body, I went to a school with 100, that means 75 of us would have flunked. And that's what Epic had at the time. Why would you continue to fund that? She wouldn't ever answer the question. I went to another question of, I just need a number, how many illegal students are we funding in the state of Oklahoma? She said, we can't drag them across the river. I said, I didn't ask that. I asked for a number. She turned around and started giving me constitutional stuff. I said, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, and neither are you. How many are there? And she walked out. So, guys, there's at that time about, I think 80,000, I think was the number they were giving us. If you look at $9,000 per student, do that math, do that sharp pencil. So we got the right person. It's long overdue. I 1,000% support you. Always have. Very glad to stand up here and say that, and we'll say that on any public platform. So you're awesome, and I appreciate your job to do.
I raise it to 2,000. You want to say anything?
No, thank you. Just tell them, remember us on June the 28th.
June the 28th. Now, one other item. I know we got some candidates in here. Are you guys still awake? You want to say something? Come on.
Thanks, Don. Well, I won't keep you long. My name's Cody Maynard. I am running for House District 21. I am also a CPA, and as such, I 100% appreciate what Cindy does for our state, because there's one thing you'll learn: a law without enforcement is meaningless. You know, the same thing that our police officers do for our laws that we pass, that's what Cindy Byrd does for us. Whenever we appropriate money and give money to the government, she goes in there and makes sure that it's spent according to our wishes. So, Cindy, thank you so much for doing that, and thank you for doing the hard thing, because I know people don't always appreciate when you go look into things they don't want you to find. So thanks for being brave and doing that for us.
And your name is Cody Maynard. That's right. Justin?
My name's Dustin Reed. I'm also a candidate for House District 21. Cindy, I'm here tonight to personally thank you for everything that you do for our state, and we really appreciate it, and you have our family support as well. Again, my name's Dustin Reed. I'm also a candidate for House District 21. Thank you.
It's Dustin, not Justin. Okay. Anything else? Come on up.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Connor Alford, representing Oklahoma Second Amendment Association. We were one of the co-hosts. I just wanted to quickly announce that on Thursday, the 23rd at 5:30 in this building, we are going to be hosting Congressional District 2, House of Representatives for the United States candidate Josh Burkeen, and we're going to be announcing our endorsements for the candidates in all of the races that are going to be on our ballot. So if you are available, again, that is June 23, the Thursday before the primary election on the 28th, and we'd love to see you. On Monday, the 27th, another organization called 580 Vote is going to be hosting a candidate forum where we will allow all of the candidates for our states or for the state House of Representatives District 21 to meet and speak directly to voters, as well as the different candidates in the county commissioner races. That'll be at the library the Monday before our election. So if the day before you've got some last minute questions, that's your last opportunity to get them answered. Please come out and see us, and if you've got any questions, let me know. Thank you. That one will start at 6 for the official forum, but we'll have events going on earlier than that. I think we'll start having some like lawn games and food vendors out at about 5. Yeah, so 5:30, Thursday the 23rd is OK2A right here, hosting Josh Burkeen, and then Monday, June 27th, from 5 to around 7-ish, candidate forums for 580 Vote. And to be clear, 580 Vote is a nonpartisan organization. We'll have Republicans and Democrats. The goal of that organization is purely to promote voter engagement. Thank you. Thanks, Don.
One last thing. You have till June the 3rd to register to vote. I know everybody in here probably is, but if you have any friends, it's time to go get them registered, because we vote on June the 28th, and this is very important. And that's it. Thanks. Good night.